everyone, welcome to our Tuesday sew along. So today we're going to be doing block 2. We'll talk about that in a minute, but I just thought I'd share with you something that's coming up. This is going to be for a class. This is the beginning of a New York beauty block, and I'm going to do a simplified New York beauty. I'm going to call it Autumn in New York because all the fabrics and colors I picked are fall colors. So I'll be sharing that as I get more of it ready, and we'll have a new list of classes that are coming up. The classes still will be hybrid, where you could come to the shop and take it if you're local, or you can take it via Zoom from wherever you are. That way more people have the opportunity to take the classes that we're going to be offering. So if there's a specific class that you've missed and you want me to make sure I repeat it, send me an email or put a note in the comment section. These are actual classes where it's an all-day thing, not just the demo that I do on Tuesday night. So that's coming up. So tonight's block is called Crowning Glory, and we're going to talk about that here. Let me go to a different camera because I'm going to show you. First of all, does that block look familiar? Because this is the block from last week. I actually have put a few pieces in here. So I'm going to take off the corners. These haven't even been assembled. And I'm going to take off these corners. So that's actually the beginning of the block that we did last week, called Ohio Star Variation. Ohio Star is typically plain blocks in the corner, but of course we put a piece block in the corner, and you can put anything in the corner. These are the colors I used last week, but this week's block I actually changed to red star points. And the way you create that is to start with squares that are 1.5 inches bigger than the finished size you want. So since this is a 12-inch block, each segment has to be 4 inches finished. So since I want a 4-inch finished hourglass, then I'm going to start with 5.5-inch squares. And I started with one blue square, and that gave me 4 triangles. One background square that you can barely see little spots on it. Kind of a cute little print. It's little tiny dashes and dots of reds and blues and cream. So I had one of each, and then I had 2 red squares. So I paired up a red square and a background square, and a red square and a blue square, and I've already stitched that. This is just going to be a quick little review, because you can always go back and watch the video from last week that shows the process that I used. So then, of course, I would cut this apart, corner to corner, and I'm going to do the same thing with the other combination. And then when I press it, I like to press toward my dark, whatever, or the common color, I guess is a better way to say that, because I have all 4 of these half squares that I have at this point have 1/2 of it that is this red fabric. So I want to press to the common color on all 4 of these. So I just press those, and I'm going to press them real quick. I'm not going to take the time to complete it, but just so you can kind of see what I'm doing. Going to my pressing mat. Now I'm going to press for the common color, and notice I finger press all of them before I set the iron down on it. My iron's not real hot yet, but I just wanted you to kind of see the process I use. So my next step for an hourglass unit is to buddy up the 2 different half squares. And when I do that, I want to make sure that I flip it so that I get the reds on the opposite side. So I can peek under here and see that that's going to look like my hourglass, and I know that's going to work. When I do that, then I'm going to draw my double line across this original seam, stitch, add them at heart, press them, and then I'm ready to trim them to my 4.5 inches using my Tucker trimmer. So that's the process I did last week on those hourglass units that are in the Ohio Star block I did. So this week, instead of having this little 4 patch in the corners, like the Ohio Star variation did, and of course we talked about last week that the corners could be twisted and they don't have to always have the color on the inside corner, but ours did. But today's block for our crowning glory is going to include some shaded 4-patch units. Now this is not new. If you've watched any of my tutorials in the last year or so, you've seen me make shaded 4-patch. And we're going to talk about how you do that. On this, I could turn my shaded 4-patch corners the opposite direction, and it makes a neat looking block. And of course you can color it however you want. On the coloring or the instructions for what you cut, this is what you will get. And it'll tell you, according to what I cut, it'll say that you need a navy square for the center. It'll say for the hourglass units, you need 2 5.5-inch squares and 1 of each of these colors. Now I put red on the paper and blue and background. Of course you can do any color you want, but whatever you want for these star points, you're going to have 2 of those squares and only 1 of this. Then it gives instructions for what you need for right here. So I'm going to go over to the sewing camera and talk a little bit about what you're going to cut and the process and how you even know what to do for the shaded 4-patch unit. So let me get this camera around here. It's not going to make much sense where it's headed. So this is the unit we're making, this shaded 4-patch unit. And like I said, on your paperwork, it's going to tell you what you need to cut for the shaded 4-patch unit. And I decided to format all of the cutting instructions this way, where the A unit is what is on the Blockbuster pattern that you download from the Studio 180 Design website. And they refer to this corner unit as the A segment or unit. They refer to this hourglass unit as the B unit. So I named them the same way so you can quickly look and see what fabrics relate to what you're doing. So also, just as a reminder, let me put this chart up here for a second. This is the basic chart for the basic units that the Tucker trimmer is designed to trim. The half square unit, the combo unit, combination unit, which is in the center, and then the quarter square unit. Both the combination unit and the quarter square unit actually starts with that half square unit's row. You're going to do the top row, and then you either complete the second row or the third row for the units you need. And so far, we've done the half square units and the quarter square or hourglass units. So this may be helpful, and there's a little note on there telling what you need to cut. So I just saw a hello from Portugal. How fun. So I know it's 11 p.m. over there, but I'm so excited you stayed up to be with us, and welcome. So now let's talk about the shaded 4-patch and how you know what to cut, what you need to do. So I'm going to demonstrate using the measurements for the 4-inch shaded 4-patch. But the shaded 4-patch technique sheet is one of the technique sheets that's available. We have all of the tools and all the technique sheets and patterns here available at the shop. It does give you a little icon that tells you which tool you need. It also has a little icon for the level of difficulty indicator, but don't let that scare you. There are some 1-star patterns and there's some 5-star patterns. If the 5-star patterns appeal to you, jump right in there because the instructions are very good. The technique sheet is a laminated sheet with the written instructions and some diagrams. But the most important thing that the Shaded 4-Patch technique sheet gives you is sizing information if I want to make this Shaded 4-Patch unit in some other size than the 4-inch unit. And it will make some really cool little patterns. There's other units and patterns that call this unit something besides Shaded 4-Patch. Kitty in the Corner, Mary's Magical Triangles. There's several other names that you might see this unit referred to as. So what we're going to do is, starting out, we have some rectangles of background fabric, and we have some squares of what's going in the corner, and then we have some bigger rectangles of what belongs on the half circle or the half square part of the Shaded 4-Patch units. Now, the Shaded 4-Patch technique sheet gives you instructions for doing some strip piecing, just in case you were going to make a bunch of Shaded 4-Patch units all the same color. Since I'm only doing 4, I just cut rectangles and squares from the sizing information. And on your Blockbuster pattern that you download, it gives different size options. Then you have to go find the sizes that you want to cut, but I'm giving you the sizing information for a 12-inch block. You could, of course, make this block in some other size. So what I'm going to do is take my small squares and my small rectangles, and I'm going to stitch those small squares to the end. I'm going to try to make this where it doesn't bounce back. I've got something too tight or not tight enough. I'm not sure what it is. And I'm going to put the pretty sides together, right sides together, and I'm going to stitch. Let me find a fabric tag because I like to sew. I was using my thread cutter a minute ago, or my, my top thread cutter, and so I didn't need a fabric tag, but now I want to sew assembly line style. So I always park my needle on a fabric tag so it's ready for the next thing I'm sewing across. And I'm going to add another one. Now I wanted to point out, excuse me, just in case you notice, I do have a little bit, I don't know that you can see it, I have a little bit of that tightly woven selvage on this rectangle. I'm not too worried about it because remember, everything we're doing gets trimmed down, so that part will be trimmed off of this unit. So I'm not worried about that appearing in my project. But you don't want to use the selvage of your fabric in your project. It doesn't play nice, it doesn't press as well, and it doesn't crease as well, and it just doesn't work as well. So you want to trim that off. But since I know that's going to get trimmed away, I'm not too worried about it. So I have 4 of these because I'm making 4 Shaded 4-Patch units. And once I get to the end of that, I'm going to grab a fabric tag and park my needle. I'm going to grab off those units. And some of you may have seen this. I stuck just a little needle threader cutter. I just put it on there with double stick tape on the top of my machine so I can quickly cut those apart. If you have one of those freestanding needle cutter or thread cutters, that kind of takes the place. Now I have this rectangle stitched, and I want to press all of these away from the square. And I can see that you can't see what I'm pointing at. I want to press toward the rectangle on all of them. So I'm going to give them just a little bit of finger pressing, and I'm pressing from the front side of the fabric as often as possible because I want to make sure I don't have any little creases on the front that are going to not or cause my piece not to have the right seam allowance in the right part on the front. So I also see somebody from St. Peter's, and I know I have several viewers from the Florida area, so I hope you are I hope you're safe and away from the weather that looks like it's coming your way. Okay, so I'm going to go to the ironing surface, and I'm going to press using my iron. I've already finger pressed away from my square. I'm just going to give it a quick little nudge with the iron. And at this time, I would grab the acorn pressing pin, just give it a quick swipe. I often do 2 or 3 at a time and set my iron on it while I'm doing the others. So it doesn't take a real long time to do it, just long enough to give those pieces just a little bit of help flattening out. So now I'm going back to the sewing area, and we're going to put together our units. So here is our the units that we just did. So I'm going to put the 2 squares at opposite ends, and I'm going to buddy those up and stitch along the long side. And you're going to find it easier if you feed your pieces through in the same order for all your units. It will work either direction. By that, I'll show you what I mean in just a second. If I feed this one through with the rectangle first, it will still work. It will just make all of the pieces look alike for the next step if I feed them all through the same way. So I try to feed them through starting either with the square on all of them or starting with the rectangle on all of them. Just makes life a little easier. And I'm just going to buddy those up and stitch along the long side. And I can feel under here that my seam allowance is still going toward the rectangle on that underside piece. That's going to make life easier too on the next step. So grab your fabric tag and park your needle. And now I just have 2 of these segments. There's one and there's one. And we're going to take them to the ironing board so you can see what I do with them next. This is kind of a fun unit. When you first look at it, it doesn't look like what I'm showing you is going to result in that shaded 4-patch unit. But I assure you, if you follow the steps, it will. So now I want to press again away from the square. And I'm looking at the back of this just to show you. If I press this away from the square and this away from the square, notice it's got a little twist there in the center. So the way we take care of that is just fold it in half and give the seam allowance a little snip. And I do snip past the stitching line, just a thread or so that I can open this up and I'm still pressing from the front side. I can feel my seam allowances going the direction I want them to go. So this seam allowance is going toward the rectangle and this seam allowance is going toward the rectangle. Once I get that locked down, then I'll just set my iron down, fold the other one in half. And if you had done strip piecing, you would have pieced together a strip of blue and a wider strip of background. Then you would have cut it into segments the same width as your squares, and then you would have done this step, just like you're seeing me do now. So now I've got my 2 units prepared. This would be a good time to grab your acorn pressing pin. Give it a quick little swipe just to flatten that seam down. And now we're going to mark a sewing line on this. Now, what you're going to do next is draw a double line between your squares going across diagonally. You can't use the quilter's magic wand, and here is the reason why. It needs to be a 45-degree angle from the corner here out to the background corner. And I should have gotten a darker thread before I started this process so you could actually see what I've stitched. I'm going to see if I can make it darker. Not with that pin. Let me grab a darker pin. So I'm looking at my stitching line from that square. I'll just draw this a little darker so you can see what I'm actually looking at. And you can see why I can't use the Clipper's Magic Wand. So right there is the point I'm looking for, where the intersection crisscrosses with the seam. I want to draw a 45-degree line from this seam out this way and from this seam out this way. I really can't tell that with my Quilter's Magic Wand. So I have to have either a regular measuring ruler like this one, like Creative Grids, like on the grid. Notice a 45-degree line here. And I can put that 45-degree line on my seam, and I can come to the point where those two seams crisscross, and I can draw a line there. And get it straight so you can actually see what I'm doing. And then I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. The 45-degree line goes on the seam, and there's actually, with this particular brand, the 45-degree lines come to the center of the ruler. So I've got a 45-degree line on this seam and a 45-degree line on this seam, and I can draw right across that intersection where the two lines crisscross. The other thing about this is there's more than a ½ inch between those two seams. That works fine with what we're doing, but that's another reason why the Quilter's Magic Wand's not the best choice of tools to do this. Something else you can do is use your Tucker trimmer, because all of the diagonal lines on the Tucker trimmer are 45-degree lines. Now, there are some lines that fit better than others. I'm going to put the 3.5-inch line on the seam. That's about this 4-inch finished unit is about the largest unit I can get by with using the Tucker trimmer for marking my 45-degree line. But I put a diagonal line. The 3.5-inch line fits really well there, and I can get all the way across. And so I'm just going to twist around. I'm going to put the 3.5-inch line on the seam again, and I'm going to come right to the intersection where those two seams crisscross right there. That's where I'm going to aim for when I put this on here. Now, it may or may not go right down into the corner. This one's just a little bit off. See how it's about, 1/8 of an inch or a little more off of the corner. That's okay, because you're not necessarily worried about that, because you're going to be trimming the outside edges of that anyway. So I have 2 units ready to stitch, and I'm going to take these back to the ironing surface, and I'm going to stitch them onto that larger rectangle that you're going to have prepared for this. Bless you, Tony. Tony sneezed real big. Okay, so I have my unit here. Let me back out so you can see it. There's my, I call this my wonky 4-patch. And I have my bigger rectangle. I'm going to buddy those up, pretty sides together, and I'm going to stitch on the line. And my needle should hit right at that intersection where the seams crisscross here in the middle. That's what I was aiming for when I put this together. Just stitch right along there. And then I'm going to grab the other one. And each time I do this, I'm making 2 shaded 4-patch units. And it's pretty slick. It's one of my favorite quick little units you can make with the Tucker trimmer. So I just stitch across there, and where I drew the lines a little darker so you can see where those 2 lines crisscross, that's where I'm stitching. I'm going to stitch across. Now you can either grab your fabric tag and sew off of it and turn around, or you can actually just turn this around and just stitch right down the edge to get to the other line and stitch back across the opposite direction. I'm still aiming for that intersection. And then I just assembly line style. You could make a whole quilt. In fact, There is a free download of a pattern on the Studio 180 Design website that you can download where you just make a whole bunch of shaded 4-patch units and put those together in a quilt. I have lost my little snips. They're under here somewhere. I'll find them. Oh, I know where they are. They're over on my ironing surface where I was snipping the seam. There we go. I found more. Tony's coming to rescue me, but you know, all of us sewers, we have more than one tool hanging around. So I have these stitched, and I'm ready to go back and trim between them. Now, I did want to point out, when you're looking for that intersection where the seams crisscross, if I stitch too close or past that intersection, I'm chopping off the point of this square. If I stitch too far on this side, then my square is going to be floating, which floating would be better than chopped off. But that's what the reason you need to look for that specific spot. So I'm going to come back over here and cut these apart. Now, a couple of things you need to know. Because this was wider than a 1/2 inch, my seam allowances here, I have two choices. I can actually just split the difference and cut down the middle and not worry about the fact that this seam allowance is wider than a 1/4 of an inch, because I'm actually more interested in this side anyway. So I can do that, or I can take a tool that has a 1/4 inch marking and I can lay it on my seam and I can trim. So this one's a 1/4 of an inch, and I can turn this around, lay that 1/4 inch marking on my seam and cut again, and then I'm going to have just a little sliver in between. That is an option. Whichever one appeals to you is what you should do. It never bothers me on this particular project to have a little wider seam allowance than a 1/4 inch, but if it bothers you, just simply cut that little sliver out from between it. Now I'm going to press this time toward my big triangle. So this ends up with a big triangle, 2 small triangles, and a square in the corner. That's the shaded 4-patch unit. And I just give it a quick little finger press so that the seam will lay the way I want it to, and I can make sure I don't have any little tucks anywhere that don't belong. This one has a thread or two where it's floating. I'd much rather be floating. This about melted my tucker trimmer. I set my iron pretty close to it, but it's okay. So then this one is floating just a little bit too. If it's too far and it bugs you, now's the time to fix it before you trim it. Mine is just a thread. This one's right on, spot on, so I'm going to leave all of them and I'm going to trim them. Let me show you what you're looking for when you go to trim them. So these are 4-inch finished units, which means I need to trim this to 4.5 inches. So I can either lay my shaded 4-patch this direction or this direction. It doesn't really matter. But what I'm looking for on the Tucker trimmer is the 4.5 inch line, this diagonal line, and the solid common line. So where this dashed line comes across the common line, I know that intersection belongs right on the center point. Because the Tucker trimmer is designed especially to trim units that have 2 diagonal seams or a point in the center on the diagonal, that you want to make sure that that lands right in the center. Now, if you're left-handed, simply turn your unit or your tool so that the half circle is on the top left corner, and line up the 4.5 inch line on the diagonal, line up the common line on the center, and you're going to cut up the left side and across. I'm not going to try that because I'm not even a little bit left-handed. And I'm going to put the half circle in the top right corner, the 4.5 inch line where it comes across that center common line is going right on the center. And I'm going to trim up, and I'm going to trim over. Then I'm going to turn my unit 180 degrees. I have 3 things to look for now. I've got the common solid line, I've got the 4.5 inch line, And I've got the trim up straight lines so that I know this is a 4.5-inch square. I know that the center of that square is precisely in the center of this unit when I get it trimmed. And I know that the diagonal seam goes right down into the corner. One thing I forgot to do when I brought this over here to press it, and I would do this, when I press that back, I would grab the acorn pressing pin and give it just a little swipe. And you can see on this gold fabric, you actually do see the acorn pressing solution up here. Many colors, you never see it. That doesn't mean it's not appearing. When you wait just a second, you can see just a little dark spot where it appears. If you're concerned that it's not coming out, turn the tip upside down and just give it a push, and you can see the liquid on your finger, and you know that it's flowing. I discovered when I first started using it, I was using too much solution, and it was causing an issue with a little scorch mark on my iron. I just cleaned that off, and I called the people at the Acorn Pressing Company, the Acorn Products Company, and she said, "You're using too much. You don't need that much." So she has been totally right. Now this is going to trim a whole lot easier because it's flatter. The solid line goes on the seam. The 4.5, goes right across, and where it meets in the middle, I know that's what goes on the center. And I don't know if you've noticed, but the checker trimmer is designed so that the 1/2-inch sizes, anything that's a half, 1.5, 2.5, 3.5, that those sizes are all from the corner of the half circle. If I'm trimming something that's a whole measurement, like a 1-inch, 2-inch, 3-inch, they're sized from the whole circle. So that's one quick way you can know whether you've got your tool turned properly, because if you are supposed to be trimming to something and a half, you should have a half circle on the top corner. Right for right hand, left for left hand. And all of the tools, I don't know if you've noticed this, but all of the tools are have instructions for right and left hand use. So all of our left-handed friends, they don't have to guess how to hold their tools. They've become very adept at it, the ones I know. Anyway, but this just makes it easier. So I've got my 4th shaded 4-patch unit. Turn 180 degrees, and you of course can do whatever color you want. I'll show you again which pieces end up where in the unit, and it's also on your cutting instructions. So this is the small square, this is the small rectangle, and this is the large rectangle, and that's where it ends up in the unit. So now I have my unit, or my pieces, ready to go together to make my block. And on the crowning glory, I used a background fabric to make the crown emerge, the crown with the spokes all the way around it. But of course you could turn this unit this way. It would create a completely different look by turning it this way. I could even put blue here, I could put red here. You don't have to stick with the colors that I used. So something else that you could do with just 4 shaded 4 patches, you can actually use it to make a little pinwheel block. So that would be one way you could arrange it. You could also put all of the shaded 4-patch units in a row. And if you had a bunch of them, you can see how that would make a whole diagonal row. So there are other things you can do with the shaded 4-patch unit. It's a great little unit that you can add pizzazz to the corners of your block, but that's not the only thing you can do with it. So before next week, I'll get that stitched together, and look in the handouts for the instructions for what you need to cut. And by the way, I do send a link via email to those who've requested it. So if you would like to be in that email group, just let me know. You can send me a message, or you can send us an email or call us, and I'll add you to that group. But I generally do put a comment in the post that has that information as well. So until next week, happy sewing, and share your fabrics with us, the fabrics you've selected. By the way, I didn't explain that the New York Beauty Block is paper pieced. And it also, notice, has some curves that we're going to be learning to piece in. So that is something that a lot of people struggle with, and it's always fun to take a class for a technique that you haven't tried yet. So happy sewing. We'll see you next week live at 5.